Thanks for staying with us tonight. The Democratic Alliance has been quick to emphasize that it remains an inclusive party for all South Africans and their diverse views. It comes after DA Public Enterprises spokesperson Ghaleb Cachalia was booted out earlier this year for describing Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide. We're joined by political analyst Thembisa Fakude. Mr. Fakude, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. The Democratic Alliance has long upheld that it is a party that, in fact, welcomes freedom of expression. Is this a sign of a party that is tolerant of freedom of expression?
Not at all. But the Democratic Alliance has always been known for its pro-Israeli stance. So it's not surprising that Ghaleb Cachalia was kicked out for his statement on Gaza, because the DA, before that the DP, they were very pro and they were totally unapologetic about their support for Israel. So it was expected, and this is for obvious reasons, of course, that the Democratic Alliance's founding fathers and mothers were of Jewish descent who happened to be Zionists in a way, because they supported this the political sphere of supporting the Israeli government. So it is expected, and it was expected that something like this one of being pro-Palestinian was going to be condemned, and it carries with it very harsh actions for those who violate the stance of the DA.
Of course, one of the difficulties now that the party finds itself in is in a position where it has to try and defend, try and justify its actions. Does the fact that this has happened outside of any difficulties necessarily of policies within the organization, does it make things more difficult for the Democratic Alliance?
I think it does. We've already had very strong messages coming from the Western Cape, which is by and large majority Muslim, and those Muslims were supporting the DA because of the certain failures and dissatisfaction with the ANC. So what we've heard now from senior leadership in the Western Cape, people such as Sheikh Ibrahim Gebros from the Muslim Judicial Council, going on to say that those that vote for the DA will be voting basically and supporting the continuing killing and bombardment of the people in Palestine. And he went on to say basically that Muslims must not vote for DA. So it was, I think, a miscalculated move by the DA to swiftly suspend Ghaleb Cachalia because of his statement. I think there's going to be consequences, particularly in the Western Cape, come 2024.
Is there a way of looking at what has happened, Mr. Fakude, without necessarily placing emphasis on what Mr. Cachalia said, which I know really is at the crux of why he finds himself in this position today? But could the DA argue that it had sent out a note to its MPs to not speak publicly on this issue, at least until such a time where it was satisfied with communicating a certain party position? And again, one of the things the Sunday Times was doing today, they ran a story saying that in this meeting with MPs, a caucus meeting, where Mr. Cachalia was called in to effectively explain his comments, none of the MPs that were part of that meeting actually stood up for him. So nobody wanted to take the risk of being seen to be on his side.
Yeah, well, I think Ghaleb Cachalia was caught between a rock and a hard place. One, pictures that continue impacting on us on television don't lie. There is an atrocity that's taking place at the moment in Gaza. Number two is Ghaleb Cachalia comes from a very well-known, respected family which has for a very long time stood for justice and stood against apartheid. And he joined an organization that many will argue that was part and parcel of the progressive forces in South Africa, but not as active, nor was it as vocal against apartheid as the ANC. So Ghaleb Cachalia is of the ANC stock. Of course, he went on to join the DA. So he was forced by many things. One, because of his convictions and his family, where he comes from. He has to speak because, there's that tradition within the Cachalia family of condemning atrocities and injustice. But two is that, all of us are actually moved by what we see at the moment on television with this continual bombardment of the Palestinian. And when he had to take a position, unfortunately took a position against his own party. It was driven by principle, was driven by his own upbringing, and he finds himself in this situation. I think it was just a matter of time that he was going to butt heads with the leadership of the DA.
If we can look at this issue a lot more broadly, Mr. Fakude, I think we can find examples. You look at recently what has happened in the EFF with the number of its leaders that it's basically removed from positions because they didn't toe the party line in, raising funds to get people to be part of its celebrations. You can look at examples in the ANC where MPs that have not wanted to toe the party line have had to deal with consequences. What we're seeing here isn't necessarily a new phenomenon when it comes to politics, or really is this just part of the nature of politics, that at the point where individuals and their organizations are not in agreement, then what we're seeing happen will inevitably unfold?
Yeah, well, it's true. But at the same time, I think notwithstanding what Ghaleb Cachalia has done, the DA, ANC, and EFF and other political parties take positions, and of course, members are expected to adhere to those decisions because the decisions become collective decisions. And we can say this time around, notwithstanding what I've just said earlier on, that Ghaleb did go against the decision of the DA. Whether those decisions were correct or incorrect is another story. So you can't go on and have your own personal view after the collective decision was made. So you have a collective decision taken by a party, and if you do regard yourself as a member of that party, you have to unfortunately adhere to those decisions. And this time around, unfortunately, Ghaleb went against it, even though you have echoes around South Africa saying that he was right to say what he did, what he said, but unfortunately went against his political party's position.
Do you think that when we, again, just look more broadly at this issue of this conflict that is taking place in Gaza, that it's only going to continue to divide our politics? And again, I talk about this because what we saw sort of in the first week of that conflict, there were different rallies being held. Some were pro-Israel, some were pro-Palestine. And in both those protests, those different protests from both sides, we saw different political parties aligning themselves, very publicly so, with the individuals that they felt needed support.
Yeah, well, I think it's also time for politicking for many organizations in South Africa because of the forthcoming elections next year. So various political parties have taken position. We know, for example, that the Patriotic Alliance under the leadership of Gayton McKenzie and Kenny Kunene have taken the position of being pro-Israel in this regard. You've got the DA that has taken the same position. ACDP has taken the same position. So there's that polarization. And I think it's a gamble for many of these political parties, but many of them do, I think, kind of mimic or know what to resonate within their constituencies. And that's precisely why you see, for example, the ANC taking a much more pro-Palestinian stance, because it is looking at the Western Cape, which has been, for a very long time, a DA-led and controlled. So they hope that if they can play within the feelings of the Muslim community who happen to be majority in that province, they might just get some few voters, and that will enable them to capture or regain control in the Western Cape. So it's part of that politicking. I think this conflict came at that time. But again, the pictures on television have had a very strong impact on many people in South Africa, because you continually see this bombardment and barbarity of, genocide unfolding right in front of our eyes. And I think most people are forced to to take position in this regard, and case in point has been Ghaleb Cachalia.
I suppose ultimately it also speaks to issues of tolerance, right? That while political parties sometimes may preach the fact that they're tolerant of divergent views, in particular divergent views to what is the official party position, in this instance it's clearly not the case.
Well, they're never tolerant. I mean, you have to adhere what the party says, notwithstanding what many have said in the past. If you go against your party's position, like it was the case, for example, Nkosazana Zuma, when she voted against the motion not to impeach, to impeach President Cyril Ramaphosa, she voted for that motion. So that actually immediately alienated her from her party, and we know what's happening at the moment with many within the AC calling for her to face the disciplinary action, etc. So it's lip service. What we've been hearing over the years from the political parties that they do stand for freedom of expression, they do stand for freedom of speech. But what we see happening now and time again is that those that go against the policy positions do get sidelined, and in most instances do get to face disciplinary actions of their own parties.
I guess the greatest judge, in particular in this instance, will then be history, given what is happening and unfolding in this moment. Thembisa Fakude is a political analyst. Thanks for your time.